Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories, and in this case, Mormon Transitions podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn, and today I'm so excited to interview a couple that I've actually known or been in contact with for many, many years. Josh and Heidi, I know at least Josh, I met you in 2011, probably February-ish of 2011, but I think we've been in contact. Heidi, were you there as well? Did I meet you?
Yeah, in New York.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we met in New York when the Book of Mormon musical first came out. A bunch of us went to New York and saw it, and that's where I met Josh and Heidi Packard. But I'm really excited for today's interview. The date is March 2nd, 2017. We're doing this as a live broadcast so people can join us through Facebook Live as well. There is a video and an audio recording. And there are several things we're going to be talking about with Heidi and Josh. So Heidi and Josh experienced, kind of a faith crisis, which is a theme that we're really exploring in depth this year. And there are a few things that are really interesting about their story. So first off, I think, and we'll get into this, but I think for Heidi and Josh, it was a really kind of difficult transition that in its early incantations probably really strained a lot of their family relationships. In Heidi's case, Heidi's actually related to some people that maybe some of our listeners will know. There's a Mormon blogger who goes by the name Nini, but her name is Stephanie Nielsen. My wife Margie followed Nini or Stephanie as a blogger a long time ago, prior to the time where Stephanie was involved in an airplane crash with her husband, Christian. Christian is Heidi's brother. And they remain very Orthodox believing members along with their family. The blogger, oh my gosh, there's the other, I'm spacing on her name. C-Jane, yeah. Kendrick, right? Courtney Kendrick. She is also sisters with Stephanie Nielsen and Christian, and so that's a family that Heidi's connected to. So anyway, a lot of still Orthodox believing members, Josh's family as well, and so I think Heidi and Josh learned a lot, maybe about even how not to process a transition with believing family members. But what's also more important is they report that they've been able to do some really good healing with their believing family members after going through their transition and even kind of maybe not handling things optimally. So we're going to talk about maybe what not to do, but also how to heal relationships after you've gone through a Mormon transition. So that's sort of one major theme. A second theme we're going to be talking about today, Josh and Heidi read a lot, and they've learned a lot about kind of secular humanism and science. A lot of people, when they're going through a transition, are asking, how do I raise my kids? Can I raise moral kids? Can I raise healthy kids? What will our moral foundation be if we don't have the church telling us what's good or bad, or the church imposing its rules and values on us? How do we raise healthy kids? And I think Heidi and Josh have a lot they want to add about how science and secularism, basically secular humanism, have helped them raise their kids. So that's kind of a second theme. And then a third theme, Josh, you're a physician, right, Josh?
Correct.
He's a physician for the U.S. Army. And I think an interesting angle to their story is how Heidi and Josh have found a supportive community as transitioning or post-Mormons through the U.S. military. And that just touches on the theme of rebuilding a supportive community once you leave. And of course, the military can be a proxy for all sorts of potential communities that can be, ways that people supplement or rebuild even a happier, healthier life after they've left religion. So those are some of the main themes. Heidi and Josh, welcome to Mormon Stories / Mormon Transitions. We're so thrilled to have you.
We're glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
Now, did I get anything wrong in the introduction? Anything you want to correct or add?
I guess I would just add that we have 4 children, and our oldest is in college. She's a sophomore in college, and our youngest is 7th grade. So, and when we made our transition, when we started our transition out of the church, our oldest was 12 and our youngest was 5. So kind of those formative years of raising our children, we have done outside of the church. So that's kind of our perspective.
So in some ways, is it kind of fair to say that you guys have been down the road a bit? You're not like kind of newbies to this experience. You've been going through it for years and can offer some insight as a couple that actually is many years into their transition. Is that fair?
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's helpful.
Okay, well that's fabulous. And again, we've got 32 people joining us live right now. We're really excited that those of you who have joined us are able to join us. And we just want to encourage our listeners, if they want to post comments or questions, we will do our best to incorporate comments and questions into our discussion today, because that's kind of one of the main things that we do, why we do these sort of live interviews, is to be able to just have that additional sort of online spontaneous participation and collaboration. So we're really thrilled about that. So thanks to everyone who's been joining us. So, all right, let's begin. Heidi, if it's all right, we'll start with you. And why don't you just start, as we always do, and talk a bit about your upbringing in the church and kind of what the church meant to you and your nuclear family growing up before you met Josh. And don't hesitate to talk about all the good as well as the things that were challenging.
I had a great childhood growing up in the church. I'm one of 11 children, and we lived in Mesa, Arizona, a great ward, great community, very strong family structure. My parents were devout. We, had family home evening every week, scripture study every morning, family prayer. All my older siblings, I'm the seventh in the family, so all my older siblings went to BYU, married in the temple, went on missions. Just great. I had a great childhood. I loved the community of the church. I'm an extrovert. I like people. I liked seeing my friends at church on Sunday. Once I became a teenager, I became a lot more invested doctrinally and spiritually through seminary. And I just kind of was, I don't know, I guess your typical model teen, that the church wanted to produce at that time of my life. I just followed the rules and went on group dates and didn't even have never paired off, I loved it. It was very comforting. It was a very stable structure. I liked that there was this kind of formula, and you were kind of guaranteed to get good results if you followed the formula, if you did all the things you were supposed to do. So that was kind of my experience, and it was great.
So again, how many kids?
11. I'm one of 11.
Holy moly! How does that work? Being one of 11 kids.
It was great. I loved it. I mean, it was, there was always stuff going on at our house, and we had a really large home, with a big basement, and there was my siblings were always bringing their older, their friends home over to visit. We always had parties at our house. It was great. My parents were always around. It was a really good life. I really liked it growing up.
What were your profession-wise? What did your parents do?
My dad is a home builder, so he owned his own business and built homes, and he built our home, and we had a fairly large home. And my mom was full-time stay-at-home mom. Very, she sewed and cooked, and just she was an excellent Mormon mom. So that was my life.
So super connected to the church.
Yes.
Do you think your family would have sort of been viewed as maybe by some as a model Mormon family? I mean, that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But I mean,
no. Yeah. I mean, yes. In fact, I remember that was
Mormon family.
Kind of I don't want to sound braggy, but yes, right. I think so. I mean, we were kind of known as the big Mormon family, and I mean, granted, there were a lot of other families in our neighborhood and in our ward that also had big families and that were, just as involved and engaged. So it's not like we were unique in that sense. There were plenty of families that were just like us, but we were probably one of the biggest families. So that was unique.
Hey, did your dad end up serving, and maybe you already mentioned this, remind me, did he end up serving in kind of leadership callings and stuff?
My dad did. I mean, he never had really, really high, or like time consuming callings, I guess. I mean, he was like in bishoprics and, high priest group leaders and high council and stake presidency, stuff like that. But he was never, the bishop or the stake president. It was usually in counselor roles. And so I remember my dad being present there. Like he was, he was busy with church, but he was also home a lot. So I kind of had a little bit of a different experience than Josh with his parents. So
that sounds great. Okay. Do you remember kind of gaining a testimony as a believing Mormon, and kind of what that, or trying to gain a testimony and kind of what that testimony would have been based on as a teenager?
Yeah, it was very much just when I was, younger, my parents taught me and I believed what my parents believed. And then, about the time I'm a teenager, I think the first really formative experience for me was in 9th grade when I started seminary. My seminary teacher, I had Book of Mormon, was Brother Mask, who is, I think he's a general authority now. Mm-hmm. And he was just amazing, just the most kind, funny, just so charismatic. And then he was also really into, I guess it was farms at the time, just the Book of Mormon geography type stuff and Guatemala and everything. And so he kind of introduced a lot of that into our seminary curriculum. And I was fascinated. I just thought, this is so cool. There's all of this evidence to back up, everything in the Book of Mormon. This is what I thought at the time, but yeah, that was kind of when I first started to get really excited about like the truthfulness of the church. And it was kind of, a lot of it was based on this belief that there was good evidence that would support, these ideas. So that was kind of exciting for me. So for you, there was a heavy intellectual component to your convictions about the church. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember trying to, pray about the Book of Mormon or receiving spiritual manifestations about the church?
Yeah, I do. And they were, those were not the things that kind of drove my testimony, but they kind of supported my testimony, I guess. Cause I did, I had some experiences where I'd pray, and it was mostly, I would feel peaceful. I never had this miraculous, amazing witness or anything. It was just more the comforter, the feeling of peace. That was kind of my, more the extent of my like spiritual experiences.
Okay. But you would have probably borne your testimony saying what? What would you have said if you had borne your testimony as a teen?
I know the church is true. I love my family. Book of Mormon is true. The prophet is, speaks for the Lord. Just everything that you were taught to say, basically,
Okay. So yeah. Really orthodox.
Yes. Very orthodox.
Okay. And happy. You'd say you had a happy upbringing. Is that fair to say?
For the most part, yeah. Of course, there were things that did kind of rub me the wrong way. A little anecdote. I remember feeling very, I love history, and I would always read historical fiction when I was a teenager. And one of the recurring thoughts that I always had was, man, I wish I had been born before 1830. Then I wouldn't I wouldn't have the responsibility of knowing about the church. So I wouldn't have to be Mormon, but right. I could just convert after I died, and I could still, I wouldn't be hampered by Mormon culture and like all the constrictive elements of what it meant to be a Mormon, all the responsibilities. I could just, I could wear pretty dresses that like the big hoop skirts and show my shoulders and, drink wine sometimes. And like, it was kind of this little fantasy that I had that, that was my out. If I could have been born in, the early 1800s or something. So, that was kind of the extent of my rebellious, attitude, I guess.
And did you ever consider the possibility that the church wasn't true or have like serious doubts?
No, not the church, but this does play into our story. When I was a teenager, I pretty strongly came to the conclusion that every other church was bogus. And like, meaning if the Mormon church is true, every other church is clearly man-made. And so in my mind, it was, and that kind of shaped when I actually transitioned out, I quickly became an atheist because I'd already knocked out the possibility of other religions being true. So that was kind of early on.
Was that the church's influence or just your own studies?
It was both. It was the church's influence because, at least the way I was taught about the church, it was very much, we are the one true church. And I remember reading, I think it was it McConkie or who wrote the stuff about the Catholic Church?
Yeah, Bruce R. McConkie and Mormon Doctrine. Yeah,
Mormon Doctrine. Yeah, I remember reading Mormon Doctrine about, the Great Apostasy and I love history. And so I knew about Protestant, Reformation and all that. And I just was like, of course, God is not, either this is all man-made, this is all made up stuff. But, of course, the Mormon church is true. It's the one true church. So it was very apparent to me that all other religions were made up and that Mormonism was the only true church. That's how I viewed it at the time.
Okay. So in some ways, the church set you up to kind of have no other chance with any other religion if Mormonism didn't work out. And that's common. Our studies find that over half of post-Mormons end up reporting being atheist or agnostic after they're done. Yeah. Mormonism often ruins people for other religion, for better or for worse. That's just what seems to happen. Okay, that's great. So Heidi, thanks for that intro. Josh, why don't you give us the same kind of background if you don't mind?
All right. So I am a 5th or 6th generation Mormon. Ancestors go back to 1830, joining the church. They were very close to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, across the plains. Family stayed active all the way down until me. I kind of broke the chain. I had a very good youth. I'm one of 6 kids. My parents were both active in the church. My mom had prominent callings. She was a ward and stake relief society president. My dad was in the bishopric, bishop, stake presidency, and was a mission president in Mozambique, Africa when I left the church.
So your dad's been a mission president.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's cool. Now, any relation to the Packards that we would know? Different spelling, right? Different spelling.
Yeah. ARD.
Okay. Yeah.
Versus ER.
Okay. But your dad's been a mission president. So that means he's probably been a bishop or stake president, right?
He was a bishop and he was a counselor in the stake presidency.
Growing up where again?
Gilbert, Arizona. So just right next to Heidi in Mesa, Arizona.
That's kind of like the Provo. That's kind of like the Provo of Arizona, right? Provo South. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Lots of Mormons.
Yep.
Okay.
Always had lots of friends in whatever school I was in that were Mormons. In fact, I didn't really have any non-Mormon friends, especially when I was older in high school. We did, family home evening, went to church, did all the requisite things. I graduated from seminary, went on a mission, did the whole leadership thing from DL to ZL to AP. Came home, went to.
Where did you serve?
Australia, Melbourne mission.
English speaking.
English speaking. Yeah.
Okay. So, great.
Tasmania, Melbourne, the state of Victoria. And I had a great mission. Had a lot of success, and lots of good experiences.
Talk about your faith as a teenager. Did you think you had a testimony? Would you have said you knew the church was true? What was and if so, what was the testimony based on?
Yeah. I would say I had a testimony from a pretty early age, especially once I got into seminary and started going to EFY. We'd do these big youth conferences and drive up to Provo and do EFY. And I remember those being a very emotional, I would call it a very spiritual experience at the time, but very emotional, lots of testimony meetings. I remember reading the Book of Mormon when I was young and, reading Moroni's promise at the end and I remember praying and getting a testimony. So yeah, I did all the things I needed to do. I had the spiritual witnesses that come with a life in church. And so I was very committed. I think I read the Book of Mormon, I don't know, 4 or 5 times before I even went into the MTC, and then just kept reading it the whole time on my mission. So I had a very strong testimony of the doctrine. I was kind of a doctrine person. Heidi, I'm an introvert. Heidi's an extrovert. Maybe she was more into the community of the church. I was more into the nuts and bolts of the doctrine. That's what kept me converted, kept me motivated on my mission. I didn't really like going to church that much. I thought it was kind of a drag, but it was true. The doctrine was true. And so I was committed 100%. I didn't have any doubts. There was no period in my life through my mission and even beyond, really up until I went to medical school, that I had any doubts or considered that the church was not what it claimed to be. What else can I tell you?
And were you kind of when you say doctrinal, were you kind of a Bruce R. McConkie Mormon, Joseph Fielding Smith?
Oh, yeah.
Was that your Bible?
I had it on my mission. I wasn't supposed to, but I had it. I read it. I believed it. I read all of the books in the library that you're allowed to have. And I would go to my mission president and he would kind of give me extra books, to read. So I remember reading The Great Apostasy by James Talmage, and I think that's who wrote it. And, just these other little books that you're not supposed to read, but I was reading. I got a lot of enjoyment out of that.
Not just you, many of us. And it's almost weird that Bruce R. McConkie was so foundational to sort of those raised in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And now the church has stopped printing the book and has completely, marginalized any of his teachings. That we've, in that way, this church has fundamentally changed in a matter of 3 decades.
Yeah, he wasn't a very ecumenical church leader, and he rubbed lots of people the wrong way. But when I was in the church, he was great. He
made perfect sense.
He made perfect sense from all that internal logic in the church.
Yeah,
his system of internal logic made perfect sense to me.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so you had a great mission, served as an AP. How'd you guys meet? Who wants to tell that part of the story?
I'll let Heidi.
Okay. His sister, his younger sister, Allie, I became friends with her because I went on this trip to Europe with a group of people, and we met in Europe, and he had just gotten home from his mission, and she and I became friends, and she said, I got to set you with my brother. So she set us up, and we dated for, we dated for about 4 or 5 months, and then we got engaged.
Went to BYU
together, and we were actually engaged for 6 months. So that was a little bit unusual by Mormon standards.
Not my idea.
Okay, was that too much or too little?
Well, it was too much. The church teaches that you should have a long courtship and a short engagement, and that's what I wanted to do. I was trying to follow the brethren,
but Heidi, I was like, no.
Heidi wanted to switch it all around.
So you're saying 6 months was a long engagement?
Oh yeah.
By BYU standards, yes, that was a long engagement.
Such a long engagement.
Yes. Most people, it was 3 months. That was kind of the norm. You got engaged and then you were married 3 months later.
And so you were probably there around the same time I was, right?
We were there.
We graduated, or I graduated in 1999.
So 94
started in 90. Yeah.
Okay, so you started right after I left.
96 to 99.
I went there in 94.
Okay.
So you
95,
you were on your mission. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Got it. All right. So you had a long, but by any other standard, short engagement.
Right.
And you were married by what age?
I was 19, almost 20, but I was 19 still.
Like a month away.
Right. I was like a month away.
So a month shy of.
20,
we usually tell our kids she was married at 20. It sounds more respectable. And I think I set a goal to be married a year and a half after I got home from my mission, and I was. I was 22.
Yeah.
And did you guys like that you were both from Arizona? Was that a huge draw?
I mean, it made holidays nicer because we could go home and spend time with both. And, we shared that Arizona Mormon culture thing.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I don't think that was necessarily what attracted us to each other, but it was kind of a nice bonus.
Sure.
We were both from the same area. So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. It was kind of nice.
Right.
So we were married. We were married, and we had our daughter, our first daughter. I had her a year.
Oh, wait. Let me just ask. We have a listener, Kathy, who asks if Joshua is related to Floyd Packard.
Not that
you probably are, but not that you know.
Right.
Okay.
We all descend from the same Samuel Packard, who came across in the 1630s to America, and Packard was kind of a derivation of Packard.
So yes,
Right.
I'm also related to people named Packard. That was also a derivation of Packard. So
Okay.
Packer, and Packards.
Okay.
Related to somehow.
Okay. I just want to be responsive to our listeners. So.
Okay.
Keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt. And by the way, we have 75 listening now, so our audience is growing.
So we had our first daughter a year and a day after.
Oh my gosh!
Our anniversary. Yes. So I literally went into labor on our anniversary.
We were taking birth control advice from my mom, who's a midwife, and she was giving us pretty bad advice.
So it was a sort of unplanned.
She wanted grandkids. I think she sabotaged it.
Okay.
Anyway, so and then we had our children pretty much 2 years apart after that. So.
And four children total.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And during this time, Josh is applying and going to med school, right?
So we had 2 kids at BYU, and then I applied to medical school, and then we had our 2 youngest in medical school in Maryland.
Wow. Okay. So which med school in Maryland?
It's the Uniformed Services University. It's the military medical school.
Oh, wow. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, it's in
Bethesda.
Yeah,
Maryland.
Bethesda, Maryland, right near the NIH, Walter Reed. And it's full of Air Force, Army, Navy, and even some public health doctors. And
did you have like military in your family where that was something you were kind of following that up, or no? Or was it just a great way to pay for school, or were you super patriotic? What was it about the military? It was a great way to pay for school. We had a advisor at BYU who knew the dean at USUS, Uniformed Services University, Val Hemming, and so he kind of cued us into the secret of USUS, because it was kind of a secret. Nobody knew about it. And it was a great way to get a medical education and not go into a lot of debt, because you're commissioned as an officer.
The medical school is free.
Right.
So.
And then you get a salary as a second lieutenant while you're going. So it was a nice way for us to get through school debt free. Heidi could stay home with the kids. And there was probably about 15 other LDS students at the school with me. So it's about 10%. 15?
Yeah, there were a lot.
About 10% Mormon.
Okay. And that's got to be probably a really high quality med school, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I still think it's one of the best med schools out there. Thought it was great. That's great. Okay. So what, any interesting stories about your sort of, I mean, it sounds like honestly an idyllic Mormon life up, from everything I've heard so far, like AP on the mission, family of 11 or 12, like super devout, married young, lots of kids, go to med school. It's sounding kind of like the Mormon dream. Yeah. Why would we leave? So any stories about your marriage and relationship prior to when things started to fall apart that you wanted to mention? I would just say that my dad was always involved in the church and leadership callings, and there was kind of an expectation that I would do that as well after my medical education and residency. And so I think I was kind of boning up for those callings during medical school and residency in the little free time that I had, kind of from a doctrinal scriptorian, historian kind of point of view. I thought that was important. If you need if, I believe that God knew everything. And if we were going to progress and become to be more like God, I needed to learn a lot of stuff too. And so I never was scared to dive in and try to learn more things. It wasn't until I started to discover more things that it became a problem. But I felt like I needed to know this stuff, know the scriptures backwards and forward, know the church history to be a good leader. And I kind of felt that was coming at some point.
And that's the irony of what for many is the transitioning Mormon experience. The stereotypes are often, they were never committed, they never had a testimony, they wanted to sin, they got offended, all things that would suggest kind of a weak commitment to the church. And what I think the evidence really shows is that for people like us, it was actually the opposite, that our faith crisis was born out of actually a very high, intense level of commitment to the church. We believed it. We believed the truth mattered. We believed that it was so important that it merited serious study and scrutiny, and that it was actually intense commitment that led to the problems. Is that, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but is that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's exactly true.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I guess the one thing I'd add about my experience from before the transition was that when we got married, when I went to BYU, I had this dream of going to law school and becoming this high-powered attorney. And actually, when Josh and I we were first thinking about getting engaged, I was planning on going to Jerusalem, study abroad. I was applying to that to go for the summer, right? I think I was going to go over the summer. Mm-hmm. And I ended up praying about it, right? And saying, okay, should I go on this study abroad, or should I, stay home and get married? And I got the answer that I should get married. And it wasn't really, I wanted to get married, but I really wanted to go on a study abroad to Jerusalem. And so that was always kind of this thing that bugged me, that I felt a little bit like I had to give up something that I really wanted to do because I needed to follow what the church or what God wanted me to do. And that would come up later when I kind of started to explore feminism and learn about it. I reinterpreted a lot of those experiences from a lot of things that hadn't necessarily bothered me a lot before. Suddenly I could look back and see, oh man, I was not really making choices for myself. So
yeah,
that's kind of my perspective.
And that is such a major component of coping with a religious transition. It's dealing with the mourning and the regrets of what decisions would we have made if we had had all the information and had felt fully empowered to direct our own lives instead of just kind of lead a life that was kind of imposed upon us.
Right.
Yeah, that's an important theme. So let's make sure and cover that. Okay, so you guys were super in it, super devoted, super committed. Any other stories about your marriage or your lives prior to when things started unraveling? Anything important for us to know? Or
I think just basically, we had a good marriage. We've always been good friends. We like to talk. We have a lot of the same interests, especially the church. We like to talk about deep doctrinal things together, interesting things. And, I enjoyed being a mother, having little kids. I loved having babies and toddlers. And I was happy to support him, and his doing his thing, although again, it was a little bit hard because I had to give up some of my things that I wanted to do, but I didn't have a lot of resentment about it at the time. And so it was, it was good. We had a good experience, up at BYU, and just kind of living in the married ward, and just having our little friends and, typical experience at BYU.
Okay. And I think that's notable because, sometimes when well-intended church leaders talk about leaving the church, one of the things they like to do is say, you'll get divorced, it'll wreck your marriage, blah, blah, blah. And one of the things that I've found is that sometimes it's not so much that a faith crisis causes divorce, but sometimes people get married and they're not they're not great friends. They're not super close. They don't have a great, healthy relationship. And so oftentimes what a faith crisis will do is reveal an unhealthy marriage that was otherwise buttressed by devotion to the church, instead of it being the faith crisis's fault for the divorce. And what it sounds like in your case, you're saying that you had a relatively healthy, well-functioning relationship, and that's an important factor in going through a transition. And I'm guessing that as you guys start talking about your transition, we're going to find that that was a really useful part of helping you guys through it, was just having a solid relationship beforehand. Is that what we're going to find out?
I think so.
I think so.
Okay. So really quickly, I'm just going to say that we have a listener who just wrote, John writes, Mormons are dramatically overrepresented in the military, medical corps, and JAG Corps. Is that true? Your experience, Josh?
I don't have the stats on it, but there were a fair amount of Mormons in my medical school. And when we moved in my residency as well, quite a few number of Mormons they went to residency with me. When we moved here, we thought we were, the church was going to be puny. There was, 3 or 4 other Mormon families that lived in our neighborhood that were also doctors.
Oh, wow.
So
yeah.
I would probably guess that we're overrepresented in the medical field and also in the military, just because it's a great way to get your education while you're married and kids.
Yeah.
That's what made us unique, was we were older, we were married, we had kids. Not many guys go to medical school, guys or girls go to medical school in that situation.
Yeah. And John asks, which branch of the armed forces? I think it's Army. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm in the Army.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. So this is great. And really quick, Josh, did you serve overseas at all, sort of during your believing years as a Mormon? Were you deployed outside of the U.S.?
Yeah, we can talk about it later.
Okay.
I deployed to Baghdad as a camp cropper for about 7 months. Just a few months after I left the church, and
that plays into our story.
Okay.
So that'll come up.
One other quick thing is Mormons are overrepresented, as I understand it, in the dental field and in the orthodontic field as well. We crank out a lot of doctors, lawyers, dentists, and orthodontists.